Well, hello there. As you probably know, we're working through a series called People Who Met God, based on a book by A.W. Tozer. And this week it's Moses' turn. And no doubt the events of Moses' life were very dramatic. But is our view too tame? What happened indeed when Moses met God? What impact did it have? Maybe it's not exactly the same as the Charlton Heston portrayal as Moses. Well, it didn't happen like this. We've been using Zoom a lot recently. It didn't happen in the comfort of our own home, with members of the fellowship also appearing. Note that Moses hasn't learnt to unmute, but is beginning to learn how to use share screen, although the screen was created somewhat later in 1648, as you see. But for your amusement, I thought I'd look up some of the facts that the movies always get wrong about Moses. Apparently, the account in Exodus isn't dramatic enough to Hollywood, so they have to embellish it. So Moses and Pharaoh did not grow up together. It wasn't a surprise to Moses that he was a Hebrew. And Moses was not a fine orator, as would disappoint Charlton Heston, but he actually had a speech impediment. The Pharaoh in Exodus is never actually named. And Moses and his brother Aaron both enacted God's will. The parting of the Red Sea did not happen instantaneously. It was an event that took all night. And Pharaoh actually was drowned in the Red Sea. So if that's where it was wrong, let's go through a few things that are correct about Moses. He was a Hebrew. His father and mother were from the tribe of Levi, and he was the youngest of 3 children. His sister was called Miriam, and his brother was called Aaron, of course. His mother saw that Moses was a special baby, it tells us in Exodus 2.2, chapter 2, verse 2, and kept him hidden for 3 months. In fact, he was hidden in a Moses basket, of course, on the banks of the Nile, and was rescued by Pharaoh's daughter. So he was raised as royalty. And Pharaoh's daughter hired a Hebrew woman to nurse him, which of course Moses' mother stepped into that role, and that all went together really nicely. And he was surrounded by all the luxuries of Egypt at that time, which there would be no comparison, I guess, in the world. Item 4, Moses was actually a murderer. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Next day, a Hebrew slave gave him away. How many murderers do we know make good? There are generally some, but not generally a good start in life, is it? And he came to the main events of his life very late in life, but because he followed God's calling. And I thought it was interesting, I hadn't realized this, but while a lot of the events were happening in the Sinai with God and with the Israelites, he'd sent his wife and son, Zipporah and Gershom, away to Jethro while he was leading the Israelites in the wilderness. Moses also knew fear. Not only did the Pharaoh trying to kill him as a result of the events we said above, but he had, when he met God in the burning bush, he had an amazing ability to give excuses after excuses. And God was pretty patient with him, but he was fearful. He was fearful of this burning bush. So fearful, even when he's speaking with God, that he wanted God to send somebody else. And yet, he turned out to be a courageous leader after his bad start. And he actually stood between God and the errant Israelites in Exodus 32, when God wanted to annihilate them. But yes, all the plagues, the Exodus, all that came about, not least using also the skills of Aaron to speak to him on his behalf. And the last slide in this section, Moses was close to God. He never actually hid any emotions or questions. And they had a long time together on Mount Sinai when God gave Moses the tablets in which he'd written with his own finger. he also asked to see God and saw part of God no one else had ever seen before, Exodus 34. And for 40 years, he read the Israelites, and God kept his promises to Moses. And it said of him, Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, in Deuteronomy. So they were close. Moses, of course, was not allowed to enter the promised land. All of those who were over 20 when they crossed the Red Sea had died out before they entered the promised land. And it's because in Numbers 20, verse 8, it's because Moses did not trust God. The Israelites were, as usual, wanting water, and he did not have the humility, as it were, it would seem, from this incident. He was addressing God as though, addressing the people as though he had the power to release the water from the rock. But he was not allowed to enter the promised land. And last of all, Moses was buried by God. I didn't realize this. And it says in Deuteronomy, Moses, the servant of God, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. And that's in Deuteronomy 34. So let's expand this, the Lord and Moses speaking together face to face as friends. There were several encounters. There was much speaking. They were very familiar. They knew each other and they had a long relationship. And they talked regularly, and I think we're beginning to discover how you lose track when you don't talk. Yeah, just like in lockdown. So they had the encounter with the burning bush where Moses argued with God, but eventually did as God had told him. And they were 40 days together when the law was given to Moses on the tablets. And I thought it was quite interesting that in spite of that, the law still had to be written down, in spite of the 40 days together. And don't forget, Moses had to go back again after he broke those tablets. There are actually 613 commandments, not just the main 10 in the law. But they were face to face for 40 days. That's a long time. I don't know if you've ever been on holiday with anybody for 40 days. It's quite a long time. Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders went up and saw God. They went up and saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, as bright blue as the sky. But God did not raise his hand against these leaders for Israelites. They saw God, and they ate and drank. And Moses asked at one point, "Show me your glory." And the Lord answered, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, but you cannot see my face." And he also spoke with Moses in the tent of meeting regularly. And also God talked to the people with Moses there. If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commands and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. So there are a lot of encounters, a lot of talking together. And sometimes really, nothing less than a personal encounter will do. The best knowledge comes from your own experience, so that includes meeting people. And for Moses, that meant giving him a job to do. And I had to look this up. Under God's feet, it said, in Exodus 24, was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, something bright blue. It is a stone. And there's a piece of it there. And God is tremendously awe-inspiring. I think this is something that we have to remember. We have to remember what the Israelites' experience of God was. He appeared to them. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. As the sound of the trumpet drew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. That's in Exodus 19. And Tozer, I think quite rightly points out that we really have to have a clear vision of who God really is. I thought this expression was nice. He is uncreated holiness. He is holiness. He's not created by anybody else. We should kneel before him. And it begs the question, is our God too small? Is he too convenient, the way that we think of God? Because God should inspire godly fear and reverence. Remember, Abraham was face down in front of God. And God is powerful. He is power. He will always be, he is powerful. He will always be powerful. Power belongeth unto God, it says in Psalm 62. We need to place ourselves fully in the hands of this powerful God. I thought this was a good quote. To know God is to experience him. Yep. Holiness in the Christian life is nothing else but the Spirit of God dwelling, filling and satisfying the surrendered, committed and trusting believer. We need to surrender completely to this awesome and powerful God. So what was the impact on Moses of these meetings with God? Well, it says several places and implies several places. Moses was God's greatest prophet. No one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did. What an accolade. And it said of Christ, he was a prophet like Moses. That's in Deuteronomy 18. And when they went up, the three of them went up with Jesus, went up the mountain. There appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus, it says in Mark 17. Direct link to Jesus. So the impact on Moses' life, the murderer found at the side of the Nile, was incredible. What's the impact on us? Well, there is a need to establish a close, intimate, personal relationship. This is the number one thing to God. The first commandment is, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. God wants to be first, must be first. And Jesus said as well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the most dramatic stories in the Bible, which I think you'll agree, Charlton Heston would agree, with Moses, also go with the closest relationship. The most dramatic events go with the closest relationship. Moses was not afraid to meet God face to face and one to one. So should we be, not afraid. Moses found out what his call was directly from God. We need to try and do the same. And we need to be an ambassador for Christ. We need to stay loyal like Moses did, to follow the cloud, to follow the pillar of fire. And this is an oasis in Sinai, which may have been travelled to in those times. It's a final slide. Seems to me we've lots to learn from Moses. Exodus is different to where I thought it. I was thinking mainly as a book of the Israelites grumping in the desert and always wanting something that they couldn't have. But the first most important thing I think here is whom the Lord knew face to face. This is what Moses had. He knew the Lord face to face. His conversation wasn't always perfect, but it was based on love and it kept going. He pleaded with God. He had that relationship that he could speak back to God in essence, and he was successful. God will give us the power to do what he has asked, and that's apparent throughout Exodus with the plagues and with the release from Egypt. He gave Moses the power. Don't forget where Moses had come from, with his humble beginnings. And others were afraid, but Moses was not. Moses had this relationship which transcended that fear. And we need to be able to place ourselves fully in God's hands. We'll never know God until we place ourselves entirely in his hands, as Tozer put it, and leave our escape routes behind, burn our bridges. But then there is nothing that God cannot do through us. Amen.